Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. A small two-room house stood at the edge of a dusty street, half hidden by overgrown weeds and surrounded by the hum of daily life. From the cracked walls to the uneven floor tiles, every part of the house bore the weight of time and hardship. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and old cooking oil. A faded calendar from 2 years ago still hung crookedly on the wall, never updated. The ceiling fan turned slowly, groaning as it struggled to keep up with the afternoon heat. This was the home Zack and Mercy had built, not out of bricks and beauty, but out of survival. The kind of survival that tasted like boiling water before food was ready and felt like sleeping with one eye open when the rent collector came around. They had no luxuries, but they had each other and their children, even if that having sometimes felt like just barely holding on. Mercy moved with purpose through the space, adjusting pots, folding clothes, picking up toys. Zack, on the other hand, often sat by the window with a cigarette in hand, staring out like he was waiting for a different life to walk up to the door. Zack had once been full of fire, talks of starting a mechanic workshop, of opening a small electronics repair stall at the junction, even of moving the family to the city where real money moved. But now, those dreams hung limp like the clothesline outside, sagging under the weight of rain-soaked rags. He barely left the house anymore. He said it was the economy, the lack of jobs, the unfairness of the world. But Mercy knew better. Something had changed in him. His silences had grown longer. His anger had gotten quieter, more contained, like smoke curling under a locked door. Still, she never accused, never questioned too much. Life had taught her to pick her battles. Instead, she focused on what she could control, her fruit stall at the market, the children's schooling, making sure there was food on the table, even if it meant going without herself some nights. Her love for her kids gave her strength. Each child had their own rhythm, their own spark. Blessing, the eldest, was serious and dependable. Ada loved to sing. Ibu was a storyteller with wild hands and a louder laugh, and Junior, the youngest, still liked to be carried everywhere, his arms always reaching out for comfort. They made the struggle worth it. Evenings were their softest hours. After dinner, Mercy would sit on the floor, Junior asleep in her lap, while the others curled around her like cats seeking warmth. Sometimes she told them stories from her own childhood. Other times, they just sat together, no words needed. On the good nights, Zack would join them, his fingers brushing against Mercy's in the dim light, his voice low and tired but present. On the bad nights, he would stay outside, smoking and muttering to himself, returning only when everyone else had gone to bed. Mercy never called him out, she just adjusted. That was her way, adjusting, bending, stretching herself thin so no one else had to break. She carried their home like a secret weight on her back, never letting it show. But even she could feel something was shifting, slowly and quietly, like a storm that hadn't yet reached the house, but was already darkening the sky. The freezer arrived on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, wedged awkwardly into the back of a tricycle Zack flagged down from the main road. It was second-hand, pale blue in color, with deep scratches along the side and rust collecting near the bottom edges like dried blood. Its lid sat uneven, leaning to one side as if it was permanently tired. Mercy stood by the doorway with Junior on her hip, watching as Zack and the tricycle driver struggled to drag it inside. He didn't speak to her, just motioned for the door to stay open. The children gathered around curiously, Ibu trying to peek inside the chest, while Ada ran to find a stool to stand on. "Careful," Zack snapped, his voice sharp and without patience. The way he wiped his forehead and stared at the freezer once it settled against the wall made Mercy uneasy. He looked at it too long, like it was something more than an old appliance. "The door is gone," she said finally, quietly. Zack turned to her, shrugged, and replied, "I'll fix it." No explanation, no details. Just that. For the next 2 days, the freezer sat like a visitor in the middle of their living space, large, silent, and oddly unsettling. Mercy moved around it while sweeping, cooking, or folding clothes, but she avoided opening it. The children, however, saw it as a new toy. Blessing opened and shut it repeatedly, laughing as the lid bounced slightly when it came down. Ada hid small dolls inside, pretending it was a secret treasure chest. Zach didn't scold them, just sat on the veranda most of the day, watching them, smoking slowly, lost in thought. In the evenings, he'd drag a plastic chair close to the freezer and sit there, as if guarding it. Mercy noticed but said nothing. She didn't know what to make of it. She didn't understand why the thing bothered her so much. Maybe it was the way it looked too big for their cramped room, or the way it creaked when children opened it too wide. She began to have trouble sleeping. Once, in the middle of the night, she awoke to the sound of the freezer lid closing slowly. She sat up, heart pounding, and looked over to Zach's side of the bed, but it was empty. She told herself it was nothing, just her nerves, just tiredness. By the third day, Zach declared it fixed. He had somehow gotten the lid to seal again, though it was still crooked. He said he'd found leftover metal hinges from a neighbor who owed him a favor. Mercy asked if it would work properly now. "It'll hold cold," he said, not looking at her. That was all. True to his word, the freezer began to hum faintly by evening, its low, steady vibration filling the silence of the house. Mercy stored some tomatoes and leftover soup inside, grateful for at least one thing easing their daily stress. Still, she couldn't shake the unease. Zach had been quieter than usual, barely touching his food, barely speaking to the children. When he did speak, he was curt, like he had a wall behind his eyes that even she, his wife, couldn't climb anymore. That night, Mercy watched him from across the room as he ran his hand over the surface of the freezer, slowly, like he was memorizing it. There was something in his face that made her chest tighten, not fear exactly, not yet, but something close. Like standing at the edge of a river and feeling the current pulling harder than it should. Morning in the household began before the sun had fully risen. Mercy was always the first to wake. She moved through the dim light with quiet precision, lighting the stove, fetching water from the plastic drum, slicing onions while Junior still clung to sleep beside the faded mattress. The tiny kitchen corner filled with the smell of boiling yam and palm oil, a scent that meant life was still moving, still fighting forward. The children stirred one by one, their sleepy voices calling out to her. She tied her wrapper tightly and moved between tasks, brushing Ada's hair into neat little plaits, helping Abu find his only pair of sandals, and packing a small plastic bowl with fruit slices and groundnuts for Junior. The morning was always a race, against time, against weariness, against the thin thread that held her piece together. Zach rarely helped anymore. Sometimes he didn't even say good morning. Mercy had learned not to expect it. Her love, over the years, had become more practical than passionate. She showed it in the way she cared for his clothes, in the extra fish she saved for his plate, in the silence she maintained even when her heart begged to speak. The market was Mercy's escape, though it was no less hard than the house. She carried her woven basket of bananas, oranges, and guavas on her head, Junior strapped to her back, and walked the long, dusty path until the stalls came into view. The open market buzzed with noise, shouting traders, crying babies, the clink of coins, the scent of smoked fish, and sun-warmed earth. She had a spot near a wooden bench, shaded just enough by a fraying umbrella donated by a friend. There she laid her fruits carefully, wiping each one clean, arranging them with the care of someone displaying precious stones. Some days were good. She'd sell most of her stock and return with enough to buy rice, maybe even a little seasoning. Other days, she barely sold anything. But even then, she never returned empty-handed. If she couldn't sell, she would trade. If she couldn't trade, she would bargain with smiles and promises. It wasn't pride that stopped her from begging. It was the memory of her mother, who once said, When you still have hands and feet, you still have hope. Mercy repeated that line to herself on days when her stomach growled louder than the buyers' voices. By evening, Mercy's body often ached from standing all day. Junior would fall asleep on her back as she made the walk home, the weight of him both comforting and exhausting. She always took a moment to pause at the bend in the road before their house came into view, using that last bit of silence to prepare herself. At home, everything was faster, louder, more urgent. The children would usually run out to greet her, their small feet pattering against the dusty floor, arms flinging around her legs. Blessing would reach for the basket while Ada asked what she brought. Ibu would shout about something that happened while she was gone, and Mercy would smile, listening with half her attention while her eyes scanned the compound for anything out of place. But even with the noise and the mess, the house still held a kind of rhythm, like a song only she could conduct. On this particular evening, as she neared the compound, she felt a strange stillness in the air. No running feet, no distant laughter. The gate creaked slightly as she pushed it open. Her hand tightened around the basket handle. Something, she thought, wasn't right. But she hadn't yet named the feeling. She hadn't yet learned that absence could be louder than sound. By midday on Sunday, Zack crouched beside the freezer with a rusted screwdriver in one hand and a pair of mismatched hinges in the other. The children were out of the way, playing behind the house with old plastic bottles and a half-deflated ball, while Mercy swept out the bedroom with Junior strapped quietly to her back. She glanced at Zack occasionally from the doorway, noting how focused he seemed, how completely absorbed he was in the task. Sweat lined his brow, and his shirt, faded and worn, clung to his back. The tools he used were gathered from borrowed pieces over the years, a bent wrench from his cousin, a pair of pliers with one missing handle, and nails salvaged from an abandoned fence behind their neighbor's house. As she watched him drive a nail into the side of the freezer, Mercy felt a strange mix of relief and concern. It wasn't often Zack took initiative anymore. His recent detachment from everything had worried her deeply, and so seeing him hunched there, fixing something, anything, stirred a flicker of hope in her. Yet there was something too quiet about him. His movements were too deliberate, too heavy. He didn't grumble about the tools or curse under his breath like he usually did. He didn't call for her help or explain what he was doing. He just worked, lips pressed together, eyes fixed on the metal. Later that afternoon, Zack stood up and wiped his hands on his trousers, his eyes still locked on the freezer like it had spoken to him. "It's done," he said plainly, not with pride, not with excitement, just finality. Mercy came over with a bowl of water and a cloth, offering it without words. He took it silently and washed the grime from his fingers. She opened the lid. The hinges were uneven, but the door now stayed closed when pushed down. It made a soft click as it sealed, a sound that felt oddly sharp in the still room. Zack watched her closely as she tested the lid a few times, his expression unreadable. "It'll stay shut now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Mercy nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. The freezer, though old and battered, now had a sort of completeness to it. She cleaned out the inside with warm water and a rag, careful not to cut her fingers on the jagged lining. Afterward, she loaded a few small bowls of leftover soup and vegetables into it. The low hum of the motor began again, a dull mechanical heartbeat echoing against the walls. Zack stood nearby, still watching, still too quiet. He hadn't touched the food she made for lunch. He hadn't spoken to the children all day. That night, after the children had eaten and drifted into sleep, Mercy sat outside with a cup of water in her hands, staring into the dark yard. The moon was thin and high, its pale light casting soft shadows on the cracked concrete. The smell of kerosene drifted from a neighbor's lamp. From inside, she could hear the low creak of the bed as Zack shifted, the same rhythm he made every night before settling into sleep. But something about the sound tonight made her chest feel tight. She stayed outside longer than usual, letting the breeze wash over her. There was a quiet tension hanging in the air, the kind that didn't need a name to be known. When she finally stepped back into the house, she saw Zack by the freezer again, crouched low, his hand resting on the lid. He didn't notice her at first. His head was tilted, eyes tracing the edge of the metal like he was measuring it with thought. She didn't speak. She walked past him, picked up Junior from where he lay curled beside the mat, and slipped under the mosquito net with him. Zack didn't follow. He remained there, still and silent, as if the freezer held something more than just food, something only he could see. The next morning rose with the pale gray of an overcast sky. Mercy stirred in the half-dark, the room still heavy with sleep. The air was damp, filled with that sticky humidity that hinted at rain even when none came. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake Junior, who was pressed warm against her side, his tiny fingers still curled around the edge of her wrapper. Zack was already awake, seated in the far corner, silently lacing up his shoes. His face was drawn, his jaw clenched in a way that made him look like he hadn't slept at all. Mercy watched him for a moment before turning to the morning's chores. She moved through them quietly, heating water over the firewood stove, cutting up yam, stirring the soup from the night before. She didn't speak unless she had to, and Zack didn't offer conversation either. It was one of those mornings where silence filled all the spaces where words used to live. Still, there was peace in the routine. Blessings swept the front step. Ada and Iboob chased each other barefoot across the compound. It was ordinary, almost comfortingly so. No one sensed the weight of what the day would bring, not even Mercy, whose heart had been feeling heavier with each passing morning, even if she couldn't explain why. By the time breakfast was ready, Mercy had packed a small cloth bag with fruit, ground nuts, and a handful of lollipops to tempt passing schoolchildren at her stall. The market was slow on Mondays, but she didn't like staying idle. Idle time gave too much room for thinking, and thinking led her down roads she didn't always want to walk. She called Blessing aside, crouched to her level, and placed both hands gently on the girl's shoulders. "You'll look after them, okay?" she said, brushing a stray braid from her daughter's forehead. Blessing nodded, serious beyond her years. Mercy turned to Zack next. "Please keep an eye on them, too. I won't be long." Zack only gave a slight nod, his eyes not quite meeting hers. There was something unreadable in his expression, like a door half closed. Mercy hesitated, then leaned down and kissed Junior on the cheek. She adjusted him on her back, securing the faded wrapper tightly. As she stepped out into the street, the familiar weight of her son pressed against her spine, and the cool morning breeze kissed her face. She didn't look back. She never needed to. Her home, her children, her husband, they were always there, a constant behind her. Or so she believed. The market was unusually quiet. Mercy sold only a few oranges and one handful of ground nuts by noon. The customers were distracted, some murmuring about fuel prices and others hurrying off to beat the rain that seemed to be building in the clouds above. Mercy tried not to think about the slow day. She bounced Junior lightly as he dozed on her back and chatted with other market women to pass the time. Around mid-afternoon, she bought small packets of biscuits and a roll of bread from a passing vendor, just something extra for the children to nibble on when she got home. It was nearly evening when she finally decided to pack up. The streets on her way back were quieter than usual, the air still thick and heavy, like something was waiting to fall. She approached the bend near their house and paused, just as she always did, to stretch her back and breathe in before re-entering the daily noise of home. But there was no sound, no giggles from behind the gate, no Ada singing off-key, no Iboob asking if she brought sweets. The door was ajar. Her steps quickened. Something about the quiet felt wrong. She pushed open the door with her heart in her throat. Inside, Zack was sitting on the stool by the corner, calmly mending a torn trouser with thread and needle. His movements slow, precise, like the world hadn't shifted. Mercy's eyes scanned the room. "Where are the children?" she asked. Zack didn't look up. He didn't stop sewing. I don't know, he said flatly. The words struck like a slap, blunt, cold, wrong. The silence that followed was too loud, too wide. Mercy dropped her basket. The biscuit spilled onto the floor. And that was when the fear took its full shape in her chest. Mercy's sandals scraped against the cement floor as she moved deeper into the room, her eyes darting to every corner. The sleeping mat was empty, the small pile of the children's toys undisturbed. The cooking pots sat untouched where she had left them that morning. It didn't make sense. They were always there. No matter what they were doing, they'd hear her voice, her footsteps, and come running. She turned to Zack again, her voice trembling this time. "Zack, where are they?" But he didn't raise his head. He pierced the needle through the torn cloth again, slowly, as though he hadn't heard her. Mercy's chest tightened. She turned toward the bedroom, flung the thin curtain aside, and found the room just as she left it, Junior's blanket still folded, Blessing's old-school notebook on the floor. No children. No sound. She checked under the bed, inside the wardrobe, behind the curtain in the corner that served as their bathroom door. Her breath quickened. She rushed out of the house into the yard, calling their names. Blessing. Ada. Ebube. Her voice cracked. She ran to the back of the house, eyes scanning for small footprints, opened the tin drum where they kept old clothes, checked inside the broken stool where Ada liked to hide sweets. Nothing. Just the sound of her voice bouncing back at her. Neighbors started to notice. A woman from the next compound leaned over the fence. "Mercy, what is it?" Mercy's mouth opened, but her voice felt caught. "My children. I can't find them. I just came back and they're gone." The woman frowned, confused. "Weren't they with your husband?" Mercy didn't answer. She was already turning back toward the house. She stormed in again, her breathing loud, her movements sharp. Zack had finally put the needle and thread down. He sat still, his hands folded, staring at the freezer. Something in his eyes made her stomach clench. "Zack," she said, louder now. "I said, where are my children?" He finally turned his head toward her, his eyes dull, empty. "Stop asking me that question." The words came out low, rough. Mercy stared at him, stunned. "What do you mean, stop asking you? They were here when I left. You," her voice broke, "you were here with them. You were supposed to be watching them." Zack said nothing. He just looked at the freezer. Mercy followed his gaze. The humming of the freezer suddenly felt louder. She took a step forward. "Zack," she whispered, "what is in there?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly stood and walked toward it. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her as he placed his hand on the lid. "Come," he said, his voice low, almost casual. "Come and see the children you're looking for." Mercy staggered forward, her mouth already forming the word no, though it hadn't escaped her lips yet. Zack lifted the lid. The inside wasn't dark. It was white and cold, humming with life. But what it held was anything but living. Mercy saw them, 3 small bodies, tangled together, crushed into the hollow belly of the freezer. Ada's hair bow was still tied at the back of her head. Ibube's little hand was clenched into a fist. Blessing's eyes were half open, her face turned upward like she had been looking for light. A thick, blackish liquid stained the corners of their mouths, glistening under the freezer's interior light. Mercy screamed. She screamed from somewhere deep inside herself, the kind of scream that didn't sound like it belonged to a person. Her knees hit the ground. Her hands trembled as she reached out, unsure if she should touch them, if she could survive touching them. Neighbors burst in, shouting, crying, pulling her back, trying to pull the lid closed again. But it was too late. The silence that followed swallowed everything. Voices, footsteps, breath. It was the kind of silence that lives forever. Mercy sat on the floor long after the neighbors had carried the bodies out. Her wrapper had slipped from her shoulders. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes, swollen and red, stared at nothing. The house no longer felt like hers. It no longer felt like a place that had ever held laughter or warmth. The quiet was suffocating now, too clean, too sharp, like the air inside the freezer had spilled out and filled the entire room. People came and went. Some whispered, some cried, some simply shook their heads and walked away in silence. The freezer stood there, still humming. No one dared to touch it. It was no longer just an appliance. It had become something else, something cruel and final. Zach had not spoken a word since revealing what he had done. He sat outside, handcuffed, his face expressionless, while two police officers stood nearby, their radios crackling every now and then. He didn't ask for water. He didn't look for mercy. He just sat there, like the weight of his actions hadn't reached him yet. Or maybe it had, and he had already left, mentally, emotionally, vacant. Inside the room, Mercy's mind spiraled, trapped in fragments. She saw Ada's drawings taped to the wall, now fluttering slightly in the breeze from the open door. She saw Abub's slippers under the bench, one turned on its side. She saw Blessing's beaded bracelet on the floor, snapped, the colorful pieces scattered like broken promises. Each sight broke something deeper. People were talking around her, some saying prayers, some blaming Zach, some blaming Mercy herself. But the noise barely reached her. She heard only what she had lost. Her arms felt too light without the familiar tug of Junior's weight. Her voice was buried somewhere she couldn't find. Her chest ached, not from shock, but from the heavy, gnawing emptiness that had taken root where her children used to live. She remembered that morning, how normal it had felt. The fruit she packed, the quiet nod she got from Zach. How could something so final have been hiding behind such ordinary moments? She kept thinking, if I had come home sooner, if I hadn't gone at all, if I had taken them with me. But none of those thoughts changed what the freezer had held. A policewoman entered the room quietly, crouching beside her. "Madam Mercy," she said gently, "we need to take a statement from you." Mercy blinked slowly. Her lips parted, but no words came. "Can you tell us when you last saw them?" the officer asked, her voice low, respectful. Mercy opened her mouth again, but her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, scraped from when she had collapsed, smeared with the faintest hint of that black stain. Finally, she whispered, "They were fine this morning. I left them laughing." Her voice cracked, shattering halfway through the sentence. The officer placed a hand on her shoulder, but Mercy didn't feel it. Her eyes drifted again to the freezer. A neighbor had finally thrown a cloth over it, but even covered, it loomed in the room like a ghost. Mercy knew that nothing would ever feel clean again. Not this house. Not her memory. Not even the sky. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, scattering a few pieces of paper down the street. Somewhere, a child cried in the distance. Mercy flinched at the sound. It was the wrong child. The sun was beginning to set when Zach was finally led into the police van. The street had grown still, as though the air itself was holding its breath. A few neighbors stood at a distance, their arms folded tightly, eyes filled with disbelief. No one dared approach the man anymore, not to curse him, not even to question him. Zach walked with heavy, deliberate steps, his hands cuffed behind him, his shirt still stained with the same dust and sweat from earlier. His head remained bowed, but his mouth was set in a firm line, like he had already decided there was nothing left to say. The officers did not rush him. They had seen things like this before, but never here, never this close. The van door opened, metal creaking against metal, and Zach climbed in without protest. The door shut with a loud finality that made one of the bystanders flinch. Mercy, from her seat on the ground by the doorway, heard it too. It was a sound she would never forget, not because of how loud it was, but because of what it took away. Zach hadn't looked back. Not once. Not at her. Not at the house. Not at the place where the children used to play. The sky dimmed, turning shades of orange and bruised purple. Inside the compound, Mercy remained in the same spot. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but a few women lingered, whispering among themselves, unsure if she needed something or if she even noticed them at all. She hadn't spoken again since giving her short statement. She had no more words. She sat with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on a piece of chalk, drawing Ada had once sketched on the ground, two stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. The lines had faded, smudged by countless footsteps over time, but now they looked strangely clear, as if time itself had remembered to leave something behind for her to see. One of the women, a younger neighbor named Igioma, brought Mercy a bowl of water and crouched beside her. "You should eat," she said gently, her voice low and uncertain. Mercy blinked slowly, as if registering the presence of another person was a task that took effort. "No," she said, her voice thin. "They're not hungry anymore." Igioma looked away, her own eyes beginning to glisten. The bowl remained on the floor beside them, untouched. Night fell like a curtain, and the darkness settled into every corner of the house. Igioma lit a small kerosene lamp and left it near the door, then quietly let herself out. Mercy was alone now. Not just in the room, but in the world. The silence had changed shape. It no longer rang loud with disbelief, but hung heavy with something deeper. Grief, yes, but something more. A hollowing. A swallowing. She reached out to the spot on the floor where Junior used to lie with his feet against her lap. Her fingers traced the floor absently, searching for a feeling that had already vanished. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed out of place, confused by the strange light of the moon. Mercy leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. She tried to remember each of their voices, the way Ada used to say mummy like it was her favorite word, the way a boob always mispronounced cereal, the way Blessing would hum when she braided her sister's hair. But memory was no longer comfort. It was a blade that cut from within. The house, though still standing, had lost all the things that made it a home. And in its place, only the cold remained. By morning, the compound was quieter than it had ever been. The usual sounds, neighbors sweeping their yards, radios humming, pots clanging in outdoor kitchens, felt distant, as though the world outside had respectfully pulled itself away from the house at the center of it all. Mercy woke slowly, not from sleep, but from a night of staring at the ceiling in silence. Her body had given in to stillness, but her mind had wandered restlessly through corridors of memory, retracing footsteps she could never walk again. The light that slipped through the window was soft and gray, casting a pale hue across the room. She shifted on the mat, every joint aching as though grief had seeped into her bones. The air smelled faintly of kerosene, of dust, and of something more bitter, something like loneliness, that had settled into the walls. When she stood, she did it carefully, as though afraid the floor itself might crumble beneath her. She moved through the room with slow, mechanical motions. She folded the mat. She picked up Blessing's broken bracelet bead by bead. She placed it in a bowl and set it aside, though she didn't know why. There was no plan to her actions, only the need to keep her hands busy. She stepped into the children's room next, her feet heavy. The door creaked open to reveal the mess of a life interrupted, colorful clothes still hanging on the wall nails, a half-finished drawing on the floor, the blanket folded at the edge of the small mattress. The silence in this room was deeper, more personal. Mercy stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping in. She walked to Ada's spot first, running her hand over the fabric she had sewn herself from leftover wrappers. Then she turned to Blessing's corner, where an old exercise book was still open to a page filled with math problems. She touched the edge of the page, her fingers shaking slightly. A sound escaped her throat, soft and raw. It wasn't quite a sob, but something close, something broken. She dropped to her knees beside Abube's small pair of sandals, one of them still smeared with dried mud from the last time they played outside. Mercy pressed the sandals to her chest and let out a low, aching moan. It filled the room like a ghost, echoing off the walls that had once known laughter. Her tears came slowly, quietly, as if even her grief had grown tired. Outside, the clouds began to gather. A thin drizzle started to fall, tapping gently on the zinc roof. Mercy didn't move. She remained on the floor, her arms wrapped around the sandals, her back against the edge of the bed frame. At some point, Ijeoma returned, entering without knocking. She said nothing when she saw Mercy on the floor. Instead, she sat beside her and placed a covered plate of food between them. The two women didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence had grown too deep for words now. It was in the house, in the air, in Mercy's chest. After a while, Ijeoma whispered, "You should come stay with me for a while." "Just a few days." Mercy didn't respond. Her fingers ran over the small buckles of the sandals again and again. She knew she couldn't stay here. Not with the echoes. Not with the ghost of that humming freezer still in the corner. But she also didn't know how to leave. This was where their laughter lived, even if the children no longer did. She looked around the room once more, each corner a memory, each item a reminder, and wondered how someone could pack up a life that had been so full only days before. Outside, the rain picked up, soft but steady. Inside, Mercy remained unmoved, trying to hold on to pieces of what had already slipped away. The house emptied slowly. One by one, the things that had once made up a life were carried out, folded clothes packed into sacks, schoolbooks bundled with old twine, toys placed gently in boxes as if the touch might wake them. Ijeoma and two other women did most of the work, moving with quiet, deliberate hands. Mercy watched from a wooden stool by the door, her eyes following every object that left the room like it was a part of herself. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. Her silence had grown into a second skin, wrapping itself around her grief, around her thoughts. The freezer, now unplugged and sealed shut, remained where it was, covered with a thick cloth. No one touched it. No one even approached it. It had become something sacred and cursed at once. When one of the women asked what should be done with it, Mercy simply turned her head away. That was answer enough. The walls looked bare now, blank spaces where once there had been scribbled names, tiny handprints, dreams penned on paper. Without the noise, the mess, the warmth, the house felt too large, like it was built for a life that no longer existed. Later that evening, when the rooms had been cleared and swept, Ijeoma led Mercy out. She held her arm gently, like guiding someone who had forgotten how to walk. Mercy paused at the threshold, looking back one final time. The shadows stretched long across the floor, and the familiar scent of dust and old cooking oil still lingered in the corners. But the laughter was gone. The voices, the movement, the chaos of daily living vanished. In their place was a heavy stillness. Mercy stepped out without a word. The street was calm, the sky painted in deep blues. A few neighbors stood at a distance, watching, murmuring. Some offered nods, some just lowered their eyes. Mercy didn't notice. Or if she did, she didn't respond. Ijeoma led her down the narrow path that ran behind the compound, where their slippers kicked up soft red dust. At the bend of the road, Mercy stopped and turned slightly. She could just see the top of the house's zinc roof peeking over the fence, catching the last light of the setting sun. And then she turned back and kept walking, leaving behind more than just a building. She was walking away from a life she hadn't finished living. At Ijeoma's home, a small space had been prepared, a mattress laid near the window, a pitcher of water on a stool, a curtain drawn across to offer a sense of privacy. Mercy sat on the mattress, her arms wrapped tightly around her body. The room smelled of lavender soap and boiled yam, clean, and unfamiliar. The hum of Idioma's fan filled the silence, a low, steady rhythm. Mercy leaned back and closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from the absence of touch, of small arms hugging her waist, of heads resting on her lap, of voices calling her name. In the quiet of the night, she whispered their names, one by one, as though calling them back. But no one answered. And in that stillness, she finally wept, not the sharp, ragged sobs of shock, but the deep, aching cries of someone mourning the kind of loss that rewrites who you are. Outside, the stars flickered faintly, and somewhere a dog barked in the distance. The world continued. People moved, lights turned on and off, the earth spun forward. But inside Mercy's heart, time stood still, locked forever in the moment the freezer opened, and everything she loved was taken from her. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.